Today, we're diving into the early years of the Great Depression. And let me tell you, it was a tale of two completely different realities. On one hand, you had the official government response, and on the other, you had what was actually happening to millions of regular people.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1931. You're in Chicago. The economy has just completely fallen apart. People are out of work. They're hungry. Bread lines are stretching around city blocks. But then, in the middle of all this chaos, a soup kitchen opens up. And it's not just any soup kitchen. It's feeding thousands of people every single day. And the guy paying for it all? He's a celebrity, a household name.
So, who do you think it was? Who was this hero stepping up when so many were falling through the cracks? You know, maybe some big-shot industrialist? A famous philanthropist? Could it have been the president himself?
Nope, not even close. It was Al Capone. Yeah, that Al Capone, the most famous gangster in America. Think about that for a second. While the government was debating its role, a crime boss was the one handing out food. I mean, if that one single, shocking fact doesn't just perfectly sum up the absolute desperation of the era and the total failure of the system, I don't know what does.
So how do we even get here, to a place where Al Capone was running soup kitchens? Well, to figure that out, we've got to rewind just a little bit. Herbert Hoover storms into the presidency in 1928 on this huge wave of optimism and prosperity. America was flying high. Nobody, and I mean nobody, saw the cliff they were about to drive right off of.
And then bam! October 1929, the stock market crashes. It's a disaster. But just 1 month later, this is what President Hoover is saying. He's telling everyone that any lack of confidence is simply foolish. You see, he genuinely believed this was just a little bump in the road, a normal dip. And in his mind, the best medicine was just confidence. But here's the thing about confidence. It doesn't pay the bills. And the reality on the ground was grim. Just look at these numbers. In just a few months, people stopped buying cars. Registrations dropped by a quarter. Consumer spending as a whole fell by 20%. This wasn't a dip. This was a nosedive. Okay, so the logical question is, why didn't the government just jump in and help, with massive aid programs? Well, the answer really comes down to Hoover's core philosophy. It's not that he was a cruel man, not at all. It's just that his idea of what the government should and shouldn't do was, well, very specific and very limited. He was a huge believer in something called associationalism. Now, it's a big word, but the idea is pretty simple. Problems should be solved locally, by private charities, by community groups, by businesses working together. He truly feared that if the federal government just started handing out money, it would destroy what he saw as America's greatest strength, its self-reliance and work ethic. So what did he actually do? Well, you can see his strategy right here. He went to business leaders and basically begged them, please don't lay people off. He went on the radio and urged everyone to donate to their local charities. He even created a special group, the President's Organization for Unemployment Relief, or POR. But get this, its job wasn't to give out aid, it was just to help the private charities coordinate better. It was the ultimate hands-off approach. And you can probably guess the result. This was not a problem that volunteerism could solve. The scale of the crisis was just too immense. These private organizations were completely swamped. By the middle of 1932, a full quarter of them in New York City had just run out of money and shut their doors for good. The whole system just broke. And even with all this evidence piling up, Hoover dug in his heels. He stuck to his ideology. This quote from 1931 says it all. He's basically telling Congress, look, we can't just pass a law to fix this. He truly believed that direct government intervention wasn't just a bad idea, it was fundamentally impossible. Okay, so that's the view from the White House. Now let's shift our focus. Let's go down to the streets and see what life was really like for the millions of people living with the consequences of that philosophy. Just read this. It's from a letter a woman in California wrote to the First Lady. She's pregnant and she's just terrified. She says it's not fair to bring a baby into a home filled with so much worry and despair. And this, right here, this is what the Depression was really about. It wasn't about economic theories. It was about this raw human fear. And for so many families, the slide into poverty was this slow, awful, step-by-step process. People who had been comfortable their whole lives suddenly found themselves in trouble. First, you'd use up all your savings. Okay, that's gone. Then you'd have to ask your relatives for money. Then you'd start running a tab at the local grocery store. And then, when you couldn't pay the rent, when you had literally nothing left,
That's when you had to go on public assistance. And when there was nowhere else to go, thousands ended up in these shanty towns. They built them on public land, out of whatever they could find, scrap wood, tin, cardboard. And in what has to be one of the most bitter, ironic nicknames in history, people started calling them Hoovervilles. A direct and very clear message about who they blamed for their situation.
All right, so by 1932, things are dire. It's an election year, and Hoover knows he has to do something. So he finally makes a big move, a major government intervention. But, and this is a huge but, it wasn't aimed at helping the people living in those Hoovervilles. He creates something called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC. Now for Hoover, this was huge. This was the government using taxpayer money to give out emergency loans. But the question is, who got the loans? It wasn't hungry families. No, the money went directly to banks, to railroads, to huge corporations. The idea was basically trickle-down economics, right? Prop up the big guys at the top, and hopefully eventually that help will trickle down to everybody else.
Yeah, the public did not see it that way at all. To the average person on the street, it looked like the government was saying no to helping starving families, but yes to bailing out rich bankers. And one critic, Congressman Fiero LaGuardia, summed up the public anger perfectly when he called it a millionaire's dole.
Now there's something else that is absolutely critical to understand about this period. As bad as the Depression was, the pain was not spread around evenly, not even close. For communities that were already on the margins, it was a catastrophe on top of a catastrophe.
I mean, just look at this comparison. The national average for unemployment in 1932 was an unthinkable 25%. 1 in 4 people without a job. But for Black Americans, it was 50%, 1 in 2. The old saying was last hired, first fired. And during the Depression, that was brutally, brutally true.
And this quote, this one really hits hard. A Black pensioner, looking back in that time, said that the Depression only became official when it hit white people. For so many in the Black community who had always faced economic struggle, this wasn't some shocking new disaster. It was just the moment when the rest of America finally felt what they had been living with all along.
Women also faced a really specific and unfair burden. With jobs being so scarce, this idea took hold that any available job should go to a man, the breadwinner of the family. And so employers would flat out refuse to hire married women, or they'd fire the ones they already had on staff. One politician called women the first orphan in the storm, which really paints a picture of how vulnerable they were. So all of this, everything we've talked about, it really boils down to this one huge question. A question that defined the 1930s and honestly one we are still arguing about today. When a crisis hits a whole nation, where does self-reliance end? And where does the government's responsibility to its people begin? The Great Depression certainly didn't give us a simple answer, but it forced an entire country to face that question in a way it never had before.